Coming up on today's Cowboys Report, the Cowboys head coach searching latest. All the details on that front. More on Leslie Frazier, and then Bobby Belt on the end and the issues at the overall for the Mike McCarthy era in Dallas. First up, we have it's really three, known interviews on the head coaching tracker. Kellen Moore, per multiple reports, will interview on Friday. Robert Saleh on Saturday. Leslie Frazier on Monday. Does leave open a little window on Sunday in which during the Eagles have their playoff game. And would anyone be surprised if they actually did an interview with Deion Sanders on Sunday, or if they even do one TBD on that front? But these are the four names who have been linked right now, credibly, and not just like, this could be a candidate, this could be like, these guys have all talked or set up an interview with Jerry in some capacity. When the Cowboys make a hire, when there's hopefully more updates on interviews, we will have a video for you. Hit that sub button at youtube.com/CowboysTV. Let's talk Leslie Frazier. Now, we've mentioned in depth Deion and Kellen and Robert Saleh. It's Frazier's turn now. He will interview for the Dallas Cowboys head coaching job on Monday. Frazier is currently an assistant head coach for the Seattle Seahawks. He has been a head coach before, many years ago. He was the interim head coach, spent 4 years there, or almost 4 years there with Minnesota. It didn't go great, and he ended up getting fired in the 2013 season after he went 5-10-1. Since becoming the Vikings head coach, previously he was the Vikings DC, the Colts assistant, and the Bengals defensive coordinator. After the Vikings head coaching job, he was the Bucs DC, then was the Ravens secondary coach for a little bit, had pretty good success overall with the Bills defensive coordinator role, and then stepped away, forced out, whatever you want to call it, and is now the Seahawks assistant head coach. I hate acknowledging this, but the Cowboys have history of doing this. Robert Saleh and Leslie Frazier combined would fulfill the Rooney Rule, which is 2 outside minority in-person head coach interviews. That means one of two things is happening here in light of the Deion Sanders stuff. Number one, the Cowboys actually do view Frazier as a top candidate, someone they are extremely interested in hiring, or they don't think/know they'll be able to interview Deion Sanders. Frazier is for me very underwhelming. A guy that wasn't a good head coach in Minnesota, is an older defensive mind that nobody else wants to interview. It's a red flag for me. So grade the potential hire of Leslie Frazier. A, B, C, D, or F. Let me know at the pinned comment of today's video, especially if the ad comes here on YouTube. I do view Saleh as a better option. I would argue significantly more so than Leslie Frazier. It's more recent head coaching stuff. It's mostly better results, especially on defense. Frazier had the one good year, but then, was well below 500. Saleh didn't have much success with the Jets, but the offense was a nightmare. And in the end, I think both guys are probably better as defensive coordinator anyways. And I like Frazier on a staff. Don't get me wrong. It's not like I think he's a terrible coach or anything. That's one of him as a head coach. Kind of Saleh's in a similar-ish bucket. And that kind of bothers people like, oh, well, hey, maybe they're interviewing him to be the defensive coordinator. You have defensive coordinator interviews to do that exact process. Like, that's what those are there for. Like, I don't want to interview these guys just to not really have them as real candidates. That's stupid to me. Why not interview a Brian Flores, an Anthony Weaver? Aaron Glenn was high on my list. Like, why don't you interview those guys? Here's my concern with the Cowboys coaching search right now. I fear that this is setting up for another not real head coaching search for the Dallas Cowboys. Just like when they hired Jason Garrett and interviewed 2 candidates. Just outside of Garrett, and they just gave him the job. Like when they hired Mike McCarthy and interviewed Marvin Lewis in a not real interview outside of Mike McCarthy. My concern here is that without actually interviewing and seeing what the field looks like, they're kind of locked in on the statuses of, well, we want Kellen and maybe Deion Sanders. Who do you want to hire as the Dallas Cowboys head coach? Let me know in the comment section of today's video. Now, there are some other names that I wouldn't be shocked if they ended up getting an interview, but the noteworthy one here for Cliff Kingsbury is if you don't interview him before the Commanders have their playoff game, you can't interview him until they are out of the playoff hunt. Now, it might not matter. They should probably lose this weekend, but that is noteworthy to me. Pete Carroll's been mentioned a lot by people I tend to trust. It wouldn't shock me, but you can also interview him whenever, so why are you dragging your feet there? The John Gruden stuff was mentioned, same with like Steve Sarkisian, but I don't know how credible that ends up being. We've mentioned Jason Witten. I would like fully expect him to be on the coaching staff, and that's like not. I don't want to force my next coach to pick a high-ranking assistant again. It's done every time they've hired somebody. Stop doing the things that don't work for you. Like, that's a terrible head coaching hire. Staff, sure, but why are we forcing it? The names I would like to interview, all top playoff teams. Aaron Glenn, Ben Johnson, Joe Brady, Todd Monken. They're not listed in any order, but I think a serious team trying to find the best head coach candidate possible has interviews out for all 4 of those guys. Then again, a serious team would have had interviews out for those 4 guys, and they would move on for Mike McCarthy on Monday and not drag their feet around for a week. That's just me. Now, today's show is made possible by Game Time. Game Time's got a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff. Only show you incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different tickets to find the best value. It is curation to make it easier to get the best price on seats to concerts, comedy, sporting events, which are really just Mavs and Stars these days, comedy, theater, everything else in between. The all-in pricing feature shows your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And the Game Time guarantee is this. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So download the Game Time app, create your account, and use code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. But again, create your account, redeem code CHATSPORTS, CHATSPORTS, for $20 off your first purchase. Link will be in the comment section and the description of today's show. Now, Bobby Belt on 105 The Fan kind of laid out some of the, underlying behind-the-scenes issues that helped lead to the end of the, and why it was probably needed, to the end of the Mike McCarthy era in Dallas. And it goes back to when he first got hired, is what Bobby said. And this had been discussed previously, too. I mean, at the time we were talking about it. The COVID-era struggle for the Cowboys was real. They just never were able to, they weren't ready for it because no one was, but they didn't seem to have a good plan in place to make it work in the same way like Ron Rivera had it was more able to make it work in Washington. That, by the way, included bad coaching hires. If you caught it at the time, the Brandon Carr then was talking to Hayden Hurst post-game and made the comment that these coaches are S-word deleted. That was bad. That was all true. That's why there was the Mike Nolan report of how bad it was there. He hired his buddies and it failed. Then there was also the coordinator tension that existed. And pretty clearly, by the way, Mike kind of looked over his shoulder a lot. He had 2 coordinators that we all spent time talking about, potential head coaches back then. Kellen Moore, who the Jones boy, like the Kellen Moore OC thing was basically this. It wasn't like you had to hire Kellen Moore, but the implication was you had to hire Kellen Moore as the OC. Like, they never said it, but it's the Always Sunny clip. Because of the implication, Kellen Moore was the offense coordinator. So, and Kellen and Mike weren't always on the same page. Then Dan Quinn was there, and Jerry loved Dan Quinn for good reasons, and Mike kind of always had to look over his shoulder. I think that was a factor, too. Like, they were going to force Jason Witten on him. Mike didn't want to do that anymore. And I don't blame him, frankly. And this is also organizational issues, too. And then at the end of it, what maybe most noteworthy was, Bobby said Kellen more or less chose to leave. Kellen was frustrated with the differences in opinion at times with Mike McCarthy, and that kind of went both ways. And then Jerry made the comments about how they were going to leave all doors open for the coordinator stuff or the coach's staff stuff, and they had already agreed that Kellen was going to come back if he didn't get a head coaching job at least. So that didn't go over particularly well. What was the most noteworthy to me was that I had not heard, this other stuff isn't necessarily new. This stuff was new, at least to me, that McCarthy had soured on Amari Cooper, and it did not go over very well in the locker room. Belt claimed that McCarthy, and this part we've heard before, didn't love Amari's practice availability and always having bumps and bruises, missing time. That's not new to McCarthy. That tends to not go over very well. Amari and the wide receivers coach did not have a good relationship, near as, to kind of paraphrase Bobby here, Sanjay Lal was a just do as you're told guy. Noted smart guy Amari Cooper, and I mean like intelligent, smart guy Amari Cooper was like, explain it to the why to me. And this is not new either in terms of like how relationships work. Sometimes that ends up being viewed as like defiance. Like, what do you mean why? You just do what I say type of deal, which I don't love that coaching style, but so be it. Mike apparently thought Amari was a leak to various media people as well. Even though there was no evidence, he just kind of assumed that was the case there. And on top of this, when McCarthy discussed that with the front office, when they were mad overall, the team was about like the front office coaching staff about Amari not being vaxxed, by the way, McCarthy's opinions were a big factor in the inevitable trade because the coach staff was like, hey, well, coach is on board too. This makes sense to me. And then apparently afterward, Mike acted like he was surprised by it. And the players didn't like that. It's like, what do you mean you didn't like that? You didn't like him. What do you mean you're surprised by that? So that didn't go over very well. And then this part's kind of like been blown out of proportion on social media from what Bobby had said previously. There absolutely were issues between Mike McCarthy and Dak Prescott. Not like disastrous, horrible, the worst things ever, but there were issues there. And we'll say this, it very clearly got significantly better by the end. By the end of 2023 and 2024, those guys were on the same page. Not quite to the different extremes of Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy, where that also ran into issues. That might have been a Rodgers thing. But now Rodgers and Mike are all good all of a sudden because Rodgers likes to be a contrarian sometimes. But other elements from this piece. Joe Philbin didn't want Tyler Smith, which we knew. Didn't like Connor McGovern. Did not think they could handle anything mentally from a pre-snap protection standpoint. So they put it all on Dak's plate. Kellen and Dak were like, no, these guys can handle it. Mike went, I trust Joe Philbin. Dak and Kellen put their heads down. And between that and the miscommunications, the 2022 interception problems, which I have said before, those were the results of just the receivers weren't on the right page. There was miscommunications. They would run the wrong routes. And you can go back and find the interview clips. Mike made a comment like we went over all the INTs to figure out what went wrong. Mike already knew what the real issues were there. It was wrong routes being run, mistakes, bad luck. And Dak did not take kindly to that. And Dak is very like PR guy. We all kind of know that. Like he's coach speak guy through and through. He's like, yeah, it's not really what was said. It was like, oh, okay, that's unusual comments there from Dak. There was a come to Mike, quote unquote, meeting where Dak, Lamb, and I think a few others were like, hey, these new coaching changes don't work. These are not what we want. We got to change things. And to Mike's credit, he did make changes and then kind of regressed away from them once the 2024 season got going. So was moving on from McCarthy the right decision for the Dallas Cowboys? Go vote for me. Y for yes, N for no in the comments section. I guess you can consider this the final postmortem of Mike in Dallas. In the end, I think it is the right move. Even if McCarthy, I don't think he's a bad coach. So not a bad person. I think he dealt with a lot of shit that he shouldn't have had to deal with. But I think change is needed for this organization. And I worried, and I am worried, you don't get real or the right change right now. I am worried about that. I don't trust them to do it. I also know this part. Keeping Mike meant there was a 0% chance of it. It was just never going to happen. It just wasn't. We know that. It's 5 years. Head coach matters. I do think Mike was put in, at times, a really, and at times unfair, bad spot by the front office. I think most of us would agree with that there. The front office remains Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones. Make no mistake, the bigger issue, the biggest issue is by far the Jones boys. I do want to emphasize that part. I also don't think McCarthy controlled the controllables either. Belt said that the players thought Rob Davis was a spy for McCarthy in the locker room, which that's not good stuff at all. So, it was time. By the way, I don't know if McCarthy would ever do it. I want McCarthy to leak to somebody Like all the annoying stuff he had to put up with. Because I want that out there too, so we can give more grief as deserved to the Jones boys.